Thank you for joining us. I'm Laura Riley. I'm the Managing Director of Chicago Wilderness Alliance. We're going to give a few more minutes for folks to join us. I appreciate your patience as Zoom always throws a curveball sometimes our way. But we are looking forward to this cafe going from unfundable to undeniable, achieving community resilience with nature-based design on McCoy's Creek. I want to encourage you all to keep yourselves on mute. There will be 20 minutes for question and answer at the end, and you're free to drop your questions into the chat so we can kind of keep track of those and they don't get lost as we move on. We will be recording this webinar and it will be posted on our website along with a PDF of the slides, including the links to the materials that you hear presented today. While we're waiting for folks to join us, I just want to give a quick thank you to our funding support provided by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, Urban and Community Forestry Program, and the USDA Forest Service. This funding helps us provide trainings and workshops and assessments so that we can help more communities improve their tree canopy and forests across the region, including through their participation in Tree City USA. But learn more by clicking on the links here in the chat. And let's see. Well, I will continue to monitor as people join us. But Nicole, I will turn it over to Nicole Machuca from the Field Museum.
Thank you so much, Laura. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Machuca. I'm an environmental social scientist at the Keller Science Action Center here at the Field Museum in Chicago. I'm on the team that's supporting the Chicago Wilderness Alliance's Climate Action Plan for People and Nature. Some of you might have been hearing that as the CAPN. I'm also a pretty active participant on CWA's Taking Climate Action, the Green Initiative. And I'll be your moderator today. So I'm beyond thrilled because we have a very special panel from our colleagues down south, not Southern Illinois, but even further than that, and they'll present on their project that took place in Jacksonville, Florida. And I just want to note, it sounds like it won't be an issue today, but if you've been watching the news, you might know that Hurricane Helene is on the move, and our panelists are in a tropical storm zone. So please send them good energy that all remains well. Everyone's safe, no high wind damage, stuff like that. And if by chance they drop off, please give them grace and patience. So you might be wondering why we have a panel from Jacksonville, Florida today. And just a little context, because of the climate work I'm doing at the center, I was granted permission, the opportunity to go to the National Adaptation Forum conference this past May, and I highly recommend that. And I attended a session about nature-based solutions, and I saw one of the panelists that's here do their presentation on this project. And then I snagged them afterward and grilled them and peppered them with questions for about 30 to 45 minutes because I was fascinated by the story and I found it to be an unconventional planning case study about how community priorities, health equity, and nature-based solutions can all meet. So we invited them today to do this cafe. So please do welcome them in the chat. Tell them where you're visiting from today. And again, please do use that for Q&A. I'll be monitoring that throughout the session. So just to give a quick outline of the project our panelists are going to talk about, this is ultimately a story, and you can go to the next slide, please. This is ultimately a story about a community and a community burdened by flooding and health issues. because of that flooding. And this story that you're going to hear about today began with a visionary nonprofit executive director who was a tenacious champion for her community and who would contact every single person she could realize her vision. And unfortunately, she can't join us today. But it's also a story about a municipality and the staff of that municipality who would answer the phone every time, be open to the vision and negotiate. It's a story about an engineering contractor who listened to the community, pivoted, and didn't let the perfect get in the way of the good, to quote him. And it's a story about a funding organization with grants in place to support projects like these, and its staff who spent the time working with that executive director to support them in their grant writing and cheerlead them along the way. So there's a lot to take away from the story. But to me, this is a story about the will of the people involved to be creative and to be committed to listen and to compromise and to partner. So I hope that you see yourself somewhere in the story and share it with others who you think might be interested when the recording comes out. And maybe you will be inspired in some ways for your own future projects in the Chicago Wilderness region. And with that, I will pass it to our first presenter. Next slide.
So thank you. That's the first part. Thank you so much for offering us this opportunity to speak about this project that is very important to the city of Jacksonville. And so glad you ran into John and got a chance to pick his brain and talk about it. So next slide. First thing I'll just do is to give you a little bit of orientation for those of you who aren't that familiar. We're in Jacksonville, Florida. That is in the northeast portion of the state. We are bisected by the St. Johns River, and we have many other rivers and creeks and streams and water bodies. And one of them is McCoy's Creek, and it lies just west of downtown, going through some highly developed areas, residential mostly on the upstream end. And then it gets more into sort of a commercial and an urban feel as it goes through, like I said, just west of downtown and outfalls into the St. Johns River. And what had happened to the creek was just decades of development and pollution and sort of man-made, forces on the creek to channelize it. And the efforts to really restore that creek is what we're going to sort of highlight and talk to you about today. So next one. Just briefly, so you know where we're going, I'll give you a little bit of the project background, talk about what we did for community engagement efforts, go a little bit into the challenges, our design priorities. John and Chris are going to speak about, funding and the details of the design, and then I'll come back at the end if we have time and give you a little bit of status update where we are in construction. Next one. So just to start out again in the background, what's the problem? Our problem at McCoy's Creek was primarily started out as just flooding, it's chronic flooding problem. So you can see at the picture on the left and the one in the top right, that is not, let's say, like a hurricane that is coming today. That's just a heavy rainfall day. If it gets into the summer and it's rained, 3 or 4 days in a row, this is what the community was living with. You can see we would routinely have cars get stuck. That's a street in that top right you can't even see, McCoy's Creek Boulevard. So we had that was just routinely happening to the community. And the city had been, trying for decades to say, we're going to do something about it, but what do we do? Out there in that community, we also have environmental concerns. The city of Jacksonville, like many cities in the 40s and 50s, incinerated their municipal waste, and the bottom ash from that incinerator was spread throughout this community. There was an incinerator right here in this in the Mixontown neighborhood, and then that ash was given to build up the banks of the creek, to build up low-lying areas, again, before people kind of understood the environmental impacts of that. So the city's been cleaning that up for a while and still have this part that is next to and within the banks of McCoy's Creek that needed to be remediated. And then finally, you can see in the bottom right-hand picture, it's just some failing bulkhead. So the infrastructure that was there was just old and needed repair. So that was kind of the general overview of the problem that we were facing. So next slide. Next one, yes. So generally, if you sort of get a bunch of engineers together and you say we've got a flooding problem, they're going to come up with some solutions that are, kind of the build a bigger ditch approach, right? We might say we need some more stormwater ponds, increase the pipe size, build higher bulkheads. Those, types of things are kind of the direction that we go. Instead of that, the city decided to try a different approach and find out what did the community really want, or how could we get a different solution for this flooding problem. So next slide. That's where Groundwork Jacksonville comes in, and KEHOS that Nicole mentioned earlier. So Groundwork Jacksonville really acted as the city's partner throughout this entire process, and they're really, really strong at that in community engagement piece. So they formed a task force, the McCoys Creek Task Force, back in 2018. And that included neighborhood leaders, members, of community organizations, uh, the St. Johns River Keeper, business owners, just everybody that had a stake in what was going to happen in that neighborhood. They got them together on this task force. They had events where they would go out and clean up the creek to really sort of get people back engaged. They had visioning sessions, as you can see up there on the right-hand picture, where the community really had a chance to talk about what did they want to see. So what Groundwork Jacksonville came up with was this concept for a nature-based solution. And not only that, they came back with the nature-based solution, but also this idea for a linear park system, to turn the banks of the creek into an amenity where you would have, exercise equipment and park benches and just whatever the community might want, but to turn it into a real gathering place. And this concept that the city has embraced and is now implementing, called the Emerald Trail. So next slide. When Groundwork Jacksonville presented that idea and that whole concept that they had really developed to the city picked that up and kind of ran with it and said, yeah, this is a great idea. This is how we're going to fix this problem. But one of the things that was really unique about this project is that community engagement piece. We kept that, and we kept that up through design and all the way into construction. We're still doing that. So that's not something that we normally do, but I think it's been a key to success for this project. We engaged a communication specialist early on in the design, and that person really helped us put together a communications plan to stay engaged with the community. So we weren't just asking the questions at the beginning and then it kind of goes into a black hole and you never hear anything else. We, continued to go back and forth to community meetings, to talk to them, to get their ideas. You see us, out on site there with some of the community members having a creek chat where we just wanted to check in and let folks know what was coming. The picture on the top right is myself and one of the designers going to a community meeting after we had put out a survey that was targeted specifically at the, like street door-to-door level to ask, what amenities do you want? Do you want picnic tables or do you want butterfly gardens? Do you want basketball hoops or herb gardens? So we really got into the details. And at that meeting, we were going back to say, hey, this is what the survey said. And this is what we're planning to do from that survey. So again, just overall staying involved with the community and staying at a really detailed level was really important. And I think one of the key pieces to building the trust in the community is when they ask for something that we could not do, we were just as willing, and we did go back to those community meetings and talk that through and say what we could do and what we couldn't do and why. So we have a great relationship going on, and I think this has been a key part of our success. So next slide. I won't go too much into the challenges because I think that John is going to cover some of that, but just know again that when we talk about this being in a highly developed area, we have lots of infrastructure in terms of water and sewer that are going back and forth across the creek. We have to go under a major interstate. We have to navigate under a CSX elevated rail bridge. So that's a challenge, as well as that community involvement that we talked about. It's a great asset, but it is also a challenge to try to manage that many voices and that many opinions. So that's kind of short of what we're dealing with as far as some of our challenges. And next slide. So We took all of that, everything that we heard from the community, everything that Groundwork Jacksonville presented to us as sort of this concept, and we narrowed down what are our priorities, what are our design priorities. So first, foremost, we have to reduce that flooding. We've got to get that under control. In doing that, we also wanted a resilient project. We wanted to, like I said, make sure that we kept the stakeholders engaged throughout this entire process. And at the end, we wanted more than just a bigger ditch. We wanted a community asset. So we took those priorities, we sort of handed them to our designer, to John Kiefer, and said, "Hey, what are you gonna do for us? What can you design?" And at this point, I'm gonna let John tell you about that. So, John, I think that's you now.
Okay, I'm ready. So next slide, please. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm in a kind of a really wonderful position for this project because my team and I were hired for scientific and technical support to help with the visioning with Groundwork Jacksonville, and then we were able to provide. Groundwork Jacksonville hired us to help them get into the community, determine what the community vision was like, help them attract funding and win grants, and help them win hearts and minds with the city of Jacksonville for this approach, because this was novel for the city. And then, as Nikita mentioned, the city then just kept the continuity with our design team, and then we became consultants to the city, and have really been carrying the stream restoration components of this project through everything, even through some strategic construction guidance and matters related to implementation. And so this project is super near and dear to my heart. Now, we knew going in that it was ambitious and novel, and with complex challenges that needed to be overcome strategically and systematically, right? So that starts with this sustaining a vision. And the vision is driven by building consensus regarding community needs within the community, and making sure that there's a good common understanding of the trade-offs of different alternatives, and then arriving at an overall solution set that the community sees as a net gain, right? So we're working very diligently for that. And that's really what the visioning gears in the lower left show. And if you're successful at achieving that kind of plurality of vision in the community, then you can start moving forward with overcoming political or developing political momentum and financing. And then the design, and Nikita mentioned that kind of continuously engaging the community, and that's what's really represented by these two arrows. You're iterating your design with the community. So you do your due diligence, you're finding the challenges in the environment that you have to deal with. You come back to the community, and you just keep continuously refining that vision and your design to arrive at the workable solution. So the big issues in design really were, this is a harsh environment. It has urban hydrology, severe urban hydrology, pollution, tight spaces to work, and topped off with a heavy dose of climate change, and real estate issues abound, right? So we needed more space than the city owned, although the city did own about 80% of the property that was necessary to do this project. The remaining 20% is where a lot of those challenges then resided. Constructability is rough in these kind of projects. Your contractor's building in a floodscape in people's neighborhoods with lots of heavy equipment for years, and contingencies like oozing hazardous waste and human remains even pop up, right? So you have to be adaptive in your measures, and you have to anticipate the need to be adaptive in your scheduling and in your design domain and what it can accommodate. So this, sometimes an overlooked factor is your design team's culture, right? So when we're dealing, knowing these challenges, I think a lot of folks might just have turned their back on the problem, but this does beg the question, like, where do you even start, right? So I think you start with this. We want to turn this cliff of imposing challenges into a ramp to success, starting with a social mindset. And we begin by cultivating an inclusive, inspiring, and approachable design culture, right? That's what we're carrying into the community, taking back to our shop, talking to the city about. Anybody that we're engaged with in this process is going to see us follow a series of touchstones that I think are essential based on my 3 decades of lessons learned regarding the design of nature-based solutions in radically altered landscapes and being conducted with high public interest, right? So the first one there, challenges are not barriers to a compelling solution, really is, it's so true that a great idea grows legs. And and these great ideas aren't going to come from the concept of a single person, no matter how well credentialed you are, right? So this is consensus building to get to that compelling part of the solution. The second one is we really must establish and maintain public trust. This starts though with active listening. So I think trust is first earned with your ears, and then it's really easy to ruin it with your mouth, right? Which brings up the third bullet. Is to be flexible in your approach, continuously adapt as needed, but be inflexible with the facts. Do not delude yourself based on confirmation bias. Don't delude anyone else, either inadvertently or deliberately, ever, right? It's so easy to lose trust. The third one is build momentum and then time your advances wisely. So some of the challenges cannot be eliminated right off the bat, right? I'm sorry, I'm on the next slide 13. Yeah, that's the one I'm on. Thank you. So, and then the kind of almost final point is you have to have people on your design team who are great teachers, and the whole team has to have insatiable curiosity. Otherwise, you're not going to properly capture what is necessary in the design to deliver what the community really wants and needs. So share your joy is, I think, a self-evident thing, but it's a long slog, and you need to balance the times you feel defeated with sharing the times when you feel enthralled. And this was overall an enthralling project. And there's going to be times you feel obstructed. Then roll up your sleeves and refer back to the first touchstone and make sure that we're working diligently for that compelling solution. And then you'll find the joy again. All right, so that's basically how we like to operate. We set that up very intentionally, and that carries through the whole process. I'm going to speak a little bit toward the actual physical challenges of the site, and both on maybe combination of social, political, as well as biophysical issues. So what do we mean by restoration? We have this great map from 1864, what McCoy's Creek looked like pre-development. That's not what we mean. We can't go back to that. Next slide, please. The original creek and its wetlands were filled and turned into an industrial rail complex. The creek was replaced by a drainage canal that Nikita mentioned south of the original one, and was gradually filled in by sediment and the municipal waste ash that Nikita mentioned as well. And that incinerator, by the way, was put right into the middle of the neighborhood next to a school. It's just mind-boggling sometimes, but needless to say, the system doesn't perform flood functions very well after that history. If you can go to the next slide and then skip through that one quickly. We've seen this one, right? So so what do we mean by restoration? The approach that we're taking here is called a priority 2 stream restoration. And what that means is we're going to repattern the canal to enlarge the drainage system in a way that reserves a critical part of the drainage corridor for nature. To do that, we're producing a migrating and meandering channel, which you can see on the right panel. And we're giving that the wiggle room it needs to operate. So it's going to change positions over time within that space. And we call that the meander belt. So we have to dimension that properly. And then above that, and beyond that, we also are enlarging kind of a flood channel that gives the floodwaters greater volume to occupy at lower elevation than the adjacent neighborhoods and streets. And then we call that the floodscape, right? So these are the kind of components we're doing, and we're just kind of harnessing natural gradients in a way, you can go to the next slide, that we kind of fit the pattern and dimension of these of those components as they vary along gradients of picking up additional flow and sediment And in the case of this project, also how far we were into the tide, because this goes from freshwater to tide over about a 3-mile stretch of restoration. And the result here was that there's 7 different stream types that we had to create to have biophysical integrity of the system. 5 of those are fully natural. Like when they're all said and done, you will look at them and not know they're not natural Florida. And 2 of those are novel ecosystems, and we'll touch on one of those a little bit later. But they're, for the most part, patterned after natural sites, and that's what we mean by restoration. Next slide, please. We had to future-proof the projects against the effects of climate change. This project had a big sea level rise component, but it also, I think, more applicable to your region. We had to future-proof this against storm intensification, right? So we're getting bigger amounts of rain on more frequent occurrences, and that's causing flooding issues by itself. So we want to extend the longevity of this investment by making the floodscape larger than it needs today. And so that's an investment that we want to assure the benefits will cross multiple generations. And so we numerically model these design outcomes to support risk-based asset management decisions to achieve that longevity, right? So the next slide shows kind of a key point here was to, recognizing that this is a multi-generational investment, we want to continuously seek to create a community amenity, right? So that the net benefits, are self-evident, embraceable to the community leaders who are thinking about not just themselves, but their children and their grandchildren and beyond. So, and they definitely were. The community often talked about their grandchildren in our public meetings. So landscape architects can excel in helping with this role. Our partner here was Scape Studio, and they did a really nice job listening to the community and working with Kay and our design team and the city to find ways to make nature accessible to the community, because the community was very clear as something they wanted. So next slide, please. Several of those commitments are being expressed here during construction, including pocket parks with varied habitats that people are approachable to visitors, including a fishing pond, greenway trail alignments. We went to great lengths to preserve the best remaining forests in the area. And there will be boardwalks, lawns for picnicking, benches, and lighting, all like just in this scene alone. So that was distributed throughout the project. Next, please. And it's important to be adaptable with that continuously. So this is that, be flexible with your design and inflexible with the facts. Flexible part, this is a good example of that. One of the community task force members, a gentleman named Henry Scott, made a late breaking request to preserve this tree, which we now call Henry's tree. It was in the way of where we wish to establish that excavated floodscape I talked about. Next slide, please. So I think it would have been, from a strictly technological standpoint, it would have been easy to say no to Henry because the design had already been approved without that tree, and was out for bid for construction at the time of the request, if I remember. So but it wasn't easy to say no to Henry, because I've gotten to know him very well over a couple-year period. And Henry told me that his mom birdwatched that tree from her home, and that it was the screensaver picture of it on his computer. So and he was speaking not just personally, but for the community as a whole. So we fortunately had designed the project with some hydraulic headroom, and we could contract the channel a bit there to conserve the tree, and did so. And while I was at it, I worked closely with the construction contractor, Kiewit, to extend the opposite bluff, narrowing the creek just a little bit as well, to avoid the tree line above it, to make sure those trees would be present as a visual buffer for the community, and from an adjacent industrial facility. So the key lesson here is definitely think ahead and make sure that you have some space to accommodate late breaking requests. Next. you know, I mentioned timing, biding your time and finding the right time to pursue certain negotiations. And probably the single most challenging part of the design domain from an asset conflict resolution standpoint was here where the buried creek needed to be sunlighted under 3 Florida Department of Transportation highway off-ramps. So the city bided their time until they had the leverage, political support, and capital needed to push this solution forward. If they had tried to force the resolution of this and negotiate too early in project conceptualization, that negotiation probably would have collapsed, and it might have killed some of the otherwise achievable, necessary flood and environmental benefits of this project, because we're doing like 3 miles of stream restoration upstream at this point. And this is between the confluence of the river and that restoration. So part of building that, next slide, please. Part of building that political capital came from earlier in the project with former city council, Councilman Lori Boyer. Councilman Boyer was a project visionary who was responsible for landing the state funding for the project, which was a lot of the funding for the project. And her particular vision, however, was to turn McCoy's Creek into something more like the San Antonio Riverwalk. If you're not familiar with that, it's sort of like very intensively managed partial flow diversion of the San Antonio River that looks like Disneyland. So, and it's a great place to visit, but the biophysical conditions and the flood pulses that come down McCoy's Creek and the purposes of this project were not compatible with that kind of a vision. So somebody had to break that news to Councilman Boyer, and that's where the part of the value of having a non-government organizational partner as part of the project leadership team can be really beneficial, right? So Kay at Groundwork Jacksonville was able to facilitate some very, I think, blunt conversations with Councilman Boyer that would have been much more difficult for a city employee to have held. And so after several such meetings with Kay and I, Ms. Boyer came around and we worked out that maybe 2 of the 7 design segments could be developed directly for the economic stimulus she desired. And it just worked out really well. And that was timing that was required to be done early, right? Because Lori's support was essential to building the political capital necessary that came in later in the project and dealing with other challenges. Next, please. So another way that we overcome real estate conflicts, and I think I'm one above that. I think I'm on slide 27, 26. That one, thank you. All right, so mutual gains negotiations basically came into play for solving distributional disputes over real estate. So there was some land that basically the city needed that was privately held. And what kind of marshaled those negotiations were the flood benefits and the water quality treatment aspects of a restored McCoy's Creek. That was able to relieve developers from some of their on-site stormwater system requirements. So they were able to more fully express their developments at their core. That freed up their property on the margins for the city to then gain access to that, do the earthwork that was necessary to pull this project off, right? So it's definitely a win-win situation. From the project design sort of drove that merit and those conditions forward. So next, please. So the project is sort of packed with environmental values throughout. First, that's what the community wanted. And then, so when we're building these new wetlands, streams, fish habitat, doing it in ways that provide flood resiliency and water quality improvements, this actually also ties to a bunch of external mission interests outside of the community from multiple granting agencies. And, you know, whether we're in the freshwater portion, like we're showing here, or next into the tidal zone of the project, we're creating, we had ample opportunities to create a lot of geodiversity that begets biodiversity and then operates at a nexus of creating immense societal values. based on environmental quality. So next, just to kind of summarize those, well, let me not get ahead of myself too much on this slide. So I'm going to unpack a bit here. So most of the benefits I just described are monetizable in a triple bottom line economic assessment. So for decades, this project sat unfulfilled when it was offered as the bigger ditch that Nikita mentioned, with a single purpose of flood reduction. It was basically required about a $40 million investment to get about $25 million of return, real estate returns. So once we started looking at nature-based solutions, that picked up the interest of folks who see return on investment in natural and social capital. So that flipped the script. Now a similar $40 million investment, because we added value related to wetland habitats, stream habitats, water quality improvements, fisheries, and recreation. We get at least a $50 million return on that $40 million investment. It was just easy economics to show. And then next and final slide before I introduce Chris, it was essentially those co-benefits that financed this project. And with each grant program seeing their own sort of nexus of value in the design, and what these agencies value turned what had been for almost 25 years an unfundable flood control project into an inevitable one. And with that, we can move on to the perspectives of one of the key co-funding agencies from NOAA's Chris Kaufman.
Thanks, everybody. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share that I'm from NOAA's Restoration Center, and our mission includes restoring habitat for both fisheries and ecosystem resilience. And so we work across the country in the Great Lakes and the Northeast, as well as in my region in the Southeast, for over 30 years, working with partners on habitat restoration projects. And so most recently, we've had kind of an unprecedented opportunity through the bipartisan infrastructure law to expand our interest in community resiliency with our habitat restoration projects that I'll touch on shortly. Next slide, please. And so I just very quickly wanted to kind of reiterate that the city of Jacksonville is our major funder, as well as the leader of this public works project need. And so what happened was we have all of these different entities working in their own spheres of conservation and community improvement. And so what happened was, and what I see in my experience, is that while everyone's working separately in their conservation worlds or community improvement worlds, there's often needs to be a catalyst, a champion, or some sort of funding opportunity to kind of integrate and bring these aligned interests together into a single project. And so the opportunity arose for me to connect with Kay Ehas of the Groundworks Jacksonville as one of those project champions, where she was acting as an intermediary to try to enhance and bring about some of those co-benefits for the McCoys Creek project being led by the city of Jacksonville. And so we had the opportunity as one of my roles at the Restoration Center to help support grant writing for some of our competitions. So next slide, please. So I'll just briefly share that my office was given, and you can go to the next slide, the Office of Habitat Conservation and the Restoration Center were given a little more than $900 million for habitat restoration, as well as for fish passage improvement projects. And so we've had the opportunity to host 2 rounds of 3 rounds of funding to allocate these dollars to grants across the country and across jurisdictions. Next slide, please. And so McCoys Creek was the recipient, as well as another project within the city of Jacksonville, of some of these BIL and IRA funding. So across the country, you can see we have dots in the Great Lakes. We have restoration projects, and we do have a 3rd round of funding opportunities. So if you see yourselves kind of in the story that we're telling, and you have interest in kind of integrating your projects with enhanced fisheries restoration or ecosystem resilience opportunities, please connect with NOAA's Restoration Center as a possible funding opportunity for you. And I will leave it there. Next slide, please. I think we may be on to questions, and save these slides for question and answer.
Yeah,
I think based on the time.
Please give your round of applause, thanks in the chat, or in the symbols. That was great. Thank you so much for being here. We do have 15 minutes left for Q&A. So maybe Lake, who's controlling our slides, there is one slide with everyone's email address. If you could just go to that one. And then if there's space, Nikita will go over these slides that Lake is scrolling through now. But we do have one question in the chat that is about how the project impacted mosquito abatement. And for those who weren't here when I introed our three guests today, our three panelists, I did mention community health and well-being as one of the priorities of this project. So maybe there's two questions there specifically to our question asker. Was mosquito abatement improved? But what were those health impacts that the community was feeling before the project, and how has that changed over time?
So I'll jump in here a little bit. One of the benefits of being so, kind of embedded in the community with that kind of engagement is they do let us know, right, when things are going on. So nobody has sort of reached out to me or haven't heard anything about any issues with mosquitoes, increasing or decreasing. The city, does have sort of a separate entity that goes out and does mosquito control and spraying. But what we do know about as far as improvements in health is that we know we've sort of eliminated that flooding hazard that would unfortunately catch people, and you have to call out the fire department to do the water rescues when that road was flooding. So we know we've gotten rid of that. We've eliminated that hazard, and as well as like even during construction, right? When we first started doing our clearing and grubbing, I would hear that there were a lot of rats that were coming up into the neighborhood, and we did our best to kind of track that down. There was a lot of other home improvements and things going on with old housing, so we couldn't be, kind of sure where it was coming from, but we did know that we were doing a lot of clearing and grubbing. So we just, again, work with the contractor to let them know, hey, if you come across any nests, go ahead and do some pest control for us on those nests. So those are, some of the things. And the biggest benefit that we'll see, I think, is when all the trees that we're replanting start to mature, and we'll see those benefits with the shade, just the getting out into nature, and being able to walk along that trail. So.
Thank you. All right, our next question. Well, first we have a comment. Appreciated the encouragement to stay focused and keep moving forward when setbacks occur. Our next question, how did you connect with community and develop your community group? Was it a public meeting? Was it all public meetings? Excuse me. Did you target certain neighborhoods? Did you assemble a project leadership team with a key community members? Thanks.
So I'll see if John knows more details about that part than me. So Groundwork Jacksonville is the one who initially established the task force. And like I said, some people were, kind of easy to know that those were the folks to reach out to, right? A representative from the St. Johns Riverkeeper, you have folks from the Jacksonville Environmental Protection Board, and then just the neighborhood associations would have presidents. So through, again, just kind of being embedded in the community, I think, and like I said, that was their strong suit, is to find out who do you talk to in the community. They built that sort of initial group and expanded from there. And when the city sort of took the project and started carrying it forward, what we did for our community, sort of outreach is we would rely on that initial contacts and those initial contact lists. But like I said, when it was time to talk about something going in a particular street, we went door to door. We put indoor hangers. We went to neighborhood association meetings. We, put out snipe signs and took surveys. So we got as much participation as we could, but keeping it targeted and focused on the neighborhood. And John, did you have anything? Because I know you were there in the early formation of the task force that Groundwork Jacksonville did.
Yeah, so I think what I can add there is Groundwork Jacksonville's approach, I think, started with making like a key hire of person that was familiar with the community, could help that organization identify who the community leaders were, right? And so a lot of this would come from churches, but a wide variety of sources, aspiring politicians, and just kind of getting into the community directly and finding out who was interested in sitting on a task force. So Groundwork Jacksonville helped the community organize around this sort of task force concept, and the task force would meet routinely. There's several neighborhoods right within this broader community, so Groundwork Jacksonville made sure that each neighborhood had at least one representative on that task force, and that we met routinely. So leading up to that, they did have some broader public meetings that were held as like events, right? Like, hey, we're holding an event, advertised it widely throughout the community. And the purpose of this event is to find out what you think McCoys Creek needs, right? So we'd have a lot of people come there. Some of those people became task force members, right? So it was just kind of building this structured way of capturing communities' voices through task force meetings and through public events. There were multiple public events. Like one was a big cookout, right, on the banks of the creek, and there was yoga classes and all kinds of cool, fun things to do. That came about because in the first wave of public meetings, there were it was mostly elders in the community. So there was a need to reach out across multiple generations, and so they had a fun event that brought in some of the younger generations, right? So it was very multifaceted. There's a public-facing website that still is being maintained to inform the community of progress, and so a lot of different ways. Like there's no single mechanism to conduct the public outreach, and it took a lot of legwork in the community to get it started.
Thank you, Nikita and John, for answering that question. We did have a question in the chat directed to Chris from NOAA about if she could share more information about the NOAA funding for the bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act grant. And Chris did respond for those on the phone. Didn't see it. There is a link, but it is found at www.fisheries.noaa.gov if you're looking for that. And I see no other questions. Is there anyone who has one they'd like to add verbally? Please unmute. We could go to Nikita back to slide for Lake. I believe that is slide 34. I'm sorry, 36.
Yeah. Nope. One more, I think. That one. Yes. Okay, so sure, I'll run through just a little bit of these construction photos to kind of give you an idea of what all of that design looks like in practice. So this first one is from May of 2023, I believe. It's kind of covered under on my screen there, but on the left of the picture, you can see that's what the existing stream looked like. You see how narrow that is, you know, the little banks there. It wasn't bulkheaded, I don't believe, in that section, but it was still, the channel was very, very narrow. And you can see on the right is where the restored stream with that meander belt is starting to take shape. So, you know, comparing that little narrow channel on the left to this widened floodplain that we're creating on the right, you can see where we're getting a lot more of that capacity. You can also see where John was talking about how it's going to, you know, kind of have the ability to naturally move and reshape and wander kind of a little bit within that belt. So next slide. I believe just shows what we look like a little bit further on in the process. Oh, okay. So this one is to show some in-stream treatment. So John didn't get a chance to talk very much about that, but when he's mentioning that, you know, we are, I guess, kind of mimicking nature, right? We can't put it back how it was. So some of the things that he designed in here were to use all of the trees that we unfortunately had to cut down in order to get to this, right? But we use those as in-stream structures to create fish habitats to sort of harden those curves. And I'll let John go back to this one after we run through the rest of them if he wants to talk in particular about what those structures are and sort of how they work. But that was again sort of very important. It was nice to be able to tell the community that we weren't just cutting down all those trees and you know sending them off somewhere, that they were going to be incorporated into the project. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the one, this is in June of 2024. So now you can see that the old stream is no longer there on the left. We've completely diverted the flow. It's now going through that new stream, the little winding channel on the right, and you can see some of the vegetation is starting to grow in pretty well. Next one. This is a vegetated reinforced soil slope, or VRSS wall as we call it. So again, John built these into the project at several locations where we had steep banks, a steep slope that, you know, we kind of didn't have the space to expand it all the way out and make that more narrow. And this is, you know, on the right is just showing the detail from the construction documents. And then on the left shows what it looks like while it's being built. And next slide shows what it looks like in June of 2024. So that's probably about a year. And you can see that it's so well grown in and covered up. Pretty soon, you won't even be able to tell that that was sort of a man-made structure there. But that was has been integrated. That's the largest one on the project. But there are several throughout the project where, again, we didn't have space to expand, you know, and do a more gentle slope. Next slide. I think that was just, again, just some vegetation that's growing in. Next one we can go to. And this gets us out to the outfall, where it outfalls into the St. Johns River, where John touched on those two segments that aren't as natural, right? Again, you can see we're down here, you know, almost in downtown. So where the creek naturally does under that blue arrow is all paved. And where the blue arrow starts, that's where the creek goes into a culvert. So it's completely underground there. And the plan was what you see on the right was to open that up and daylight the creek, which again was a key part of one of the grants that Groundwork Jacksonville did for the design of this. One of the key parts was to daylight and open up that creek to a more natural solution. So that was a big negotiation. We finally got that, and sort of the trade-off or the compromise, even though we have to do this hardened bulkhead section through this portion, is we are going in with floating wetlands to soften you know, to soften the look, as well as to provide something for fish to nibble on. And then the next slide, I think might be the last one, is to just show kind of what that looks like under construction. So this was just last month, and you can see that taking shape very nicely. Again, it'll be bulkheaded because that's what we have to do. Again, within that narrow space, but still provide the flood benefits that we need. But part of the design gives us, it's hard to see, but that the sort of bulkhead cap and that wide concrete section that you see, that'll be a nice 12-foot, I believe it is, walkway where folks can sort of go down and walk along the banks of the creek. Most of the time that's where it will be. It will be down within those lower bulkheaded sections. And then when we have those heavy rainfalls or storm events, we will have that additional 12 feet on either side for the creek to sort of overflow that lower level. So that was it. I think if you hit the next one, I think that's it for me. So yeah. John, did you want to, if we have any more questions, we'll take them now. Or John, you could go back and talk, some more about that wing deflector and the tow wood or.
Yeah, and probably actually want to talk maybe just a little bit more about where we sunlighted the creek.
Okay, so that's
because
back one.
to me, like we invoke a lot of natural channel design principles with the repurposing of the large woody debris from the trees we had to clear, and that creates a lot of the in-stream habitat for fish, and it kind of acts like a surrogate for some of the stability that a mature forest gives to that creek channel. Where that's not possible, where we don't have enough lateral room to work, that's where we have to come up with these more novel solutions, right? So it's I think awesome when we can mimic the multiple millennia of tinkering that nature did to perfect its pattern and dimension. When we have enough space for that, we do that. Where we don't have enough space, and this space here at the outfall, at the confluence of St. Johns River, big tidal surges can come up the St. Johns River. And these confluences with all the creeks that come into the river have pretty massive tidal marshes associated with a big open meandering channel. So this was some of the most valuable real estate, and it was all private property, in the city. And the landowner basically said, no, John, you can't have a football field's width of our land and us sustain a economically viable return on our investment on that real estate development. So I did ask. Kay made me ask. I kind of figured the answer would be no. But so then we started talking about just how much does the city need to accomplish the goals and meet the grant submittal requirements that we were at the time considering pursuing to handle a 9 or 10-foot tide surge from a hurricane if it was coming up on the Atlantic side, but also on a daily basis provide a safe haven for juvenile estuarine fishes to work their way into their rearing grounds that we were designing in the upper area, right? So this, as a fish passage item, was critically important. It had to be resilient to big, nasty flood pulses, both from the freshwater side and the tidal side. And so we worked out what the minimum dimensions and pattern of that shape needed to be and negotiate. And then the city, combination, like tag teaming of Groundwork Jacksonville and the city of Jacksonville, and at high political levels too, worked out the deal to make this happen. And it's really cool. You can see the developers sort of plan on what the left side of this lower panel is. That's where Councilwoman Boyer is sort of getting her aspects of a San Antonio Riverwalk, right? There's going to be restaurants and shops and hotels and stuff like that, housing. And then the green space shown there is a public park. And with accessibility, so people can get down onto that lower tier that Nikita talked about. This is sort of like a 2-stage bulkhead. The lower tier with that 12-foot walkway, picnic tables and places to get close to the water, kayak launch, and during normal flow conditions. but it's designed to withstand the big flood pulses as well. And when those waters recede, you can go back to recreating on that surface. All right, so anyway, lots of nifty design ideas packed into this thing. That's what makes it so intellectually stimulating as a designer. This is the most emotionally rewarding project I think I've ever worked on. From the very first public meeting that Kay got me involved with, and we were into the community, didn't know how the community was going to respond to us. And they not just metaphorically embraced this. I got more hugs in that meeting, at the end of that meeting, than I have in any other public meeting in the history of my 30+ year career. And so it's been a very emotionally satisfying project all the way through. And that's why, you know, I made that quote about share your joy. There's so much joy to share about this. And it's just a blessing to work with people like Nikita, Chris, Kay, and the entire community. You know, Henry Scott, I mentioned earlier. I've made friends through this process, and they're just incredible relationships. So very, very satisfying. It's not just about the science, it's very social and doubly rewarding.
I just want to thank everyone and encourage folks to LinkedIn, Nikita Reed, Chris Kaufman, and John Kiefer. And you know, maybe we'll hear about your projects in a region in the future. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Laura, for hosting.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that. We can go to the last slide. I want to reiterate that all of this is so incredible to hear at every stage and every step of the game. And that's why we do these cafes. But Nicole, you exemplify Chicago Wilderness Alliance in partnership by just hearing a really inspiring model that we want to share with our Chicago Wilderness partners, like all of you. And I want to let you know, like, if anybody else is on this call and you have ideas for future cafes like this, we definitely want to share the joy. And we are so excited that you were able to be here today and that the hurricane didn't disrupt this presentation. But thank you very much for being with us today. And we will share the recording with all of our partners. It will be posted on our website along with a PDF of the slides with the links. And it will be sent out to everyone who registered. We had like 77 people register today, and I know that that oftentimes people are looking forward to having the recording and the PDF of the slides. So thank you for your time, and we are really, really appreciative of the opportunity to spotlight this story. It's truly a success. So with that, I'll let you all get back to your day. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.